Khe, it is an absolute pleasure. Second time on the podcast. I was just re-listening to our first episode and I just couldn't help but notice the same but different in the approaches, and it was cool to see us or hear us at a different point in our lives. And I'm gonna link it down below. But just thank you for coming back here, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Danny. Like I said before we went live, it's just been so rad to watch your show, you grow as a human, and I'm honored to be back again, and I'm ready to rip.
Yeah, so I've noticed you've been on a bunch of different podcasts over the past week even. What's causing you to appear on so many pods?
Yeah, it's a good question. One is that I just love talking. I love talking. I love hanging. I think I got a lot of fun ideas to discuss with smart people. And so I'm always down to have great conversations. I think the second was that, I was even joking with you. I'm like, oh, are you going to have me back after having, Gary Vee and, all these legends on your show? I think I kind of got over this little bit of imposter syndrome where it's like, well, I think a big one for me in podcasts is I don't have a book, right? I don't have a book. And so I have this like mental block that because I don't have a book, I don't have an excuse to get on people's podcasts, which I know in my heart of hearts is not accurate, but I still get these like pangs of imposter syndrome. It's like, well, look at this person with this bestseller, or James Clear with this, or, and so I'm kind of like working to get over that block. And then the third thing is that personally, I'm going through a different series, seasons of life, seasons of entrepreneurship, and a really powerful, big season that I'm very proud of is moving out of solo creator land and building a team and payroll and policies and weekly meetings and expense reimbursements and all of that stuff. And I'm super stoked about that. I'm super stoked because I never thought it's what I wanted, right? I thought that I became a creator to avoid doing all that stuff. And now I'm like voluntarily bringing it in. I'm doing it in a way that I think is really different. And what I mean by that is it's not motivated by money. Money is not the driving force. Creating and building is the driving force, just with more people. And then the third is that, related to the second, is I hope that other people, whether it's a team, whether it's another creator, whether it's like a small business, whether it's a team in a giant business, can hear some of these principles that, we've developed over so long and be like, yeah, we could do that too, right? We could do that. We could shut off our email at 6 p.m. or we could not send Slack messages on the weekend, or we could have an unlimited vacation policy. And I just hope that other people can see that there's another way, right? There's another way. And, after 7 years of being at it, like hopefully I've earned the right to talk about it and to share it. And, that's what's got me excited to get back on the circuit.
Well, yeah, you bring up the important point of doing it differently. And I think one thing that really stood out to me was in your company policy was saying, we see each other as human beings, not just workers. Our work environment is anchored by respect, compassion, and empathy. How did you come across this last bullet point in that policy?
Man, you said the P word, the policy word. We went there right away. Push and P. Let me step back, right?
Please.
I was a blogger, a newsletter creator. Mostly words were my medium for 5-6 years. hired a virtual assistant to help me kind of scale myself, got into the course business, which is kind of like the main part of it. That's like our main business now. And it was all like, first of all, none of it was a plan. Like there was no plan to any of this. It was very much, I have my own unique set of principles as an entrepreneur, right? And one of them is follow the fun. So I do things that are fun. Another one is, what if it was easy? So look for things that come naturally, like look at ways at which you can maximize flow for yourself and for others. And the brass tacks is, I have architected a life that I want to live for myself. That you need money to live that life, but it transcends money, right? And so, for example, I don't have meetings until 11:30 Pacific every day. So I can watch the surf conditions, the wind, my friends can give me surf reports, and then between 7 and 11:30, I can go and surf 2.5 hours at the perfect time of the day. I'm not going to build a company if you're going to take that away from me. Full stop. You could give me $1 billion. I ain't taking it. Because if you gave me $1 billion, it would be just so I could go do that. And I don't have $1 billion, and I need to work and all of that. But you see the circularity in that. I'm not taking the $1 billion because I'm protecting that. And so as I started to think about growing the business, I started to think about like, what's that, right? So that is, surfing for me is a metaphor or a vessel for my physical health, my spiritual health. It's very meditative. My social health, because a lot of my friends and my community's in the water. And so like what I was basically saying is like, I don't want to get into some kind of work agreement where you're going to take away from my physical health, my friendship, my mental health, and my social health, right? Which it kind of sounds, that's not crazy talk, but it is kind of crazy talk in like the construct that we have in work, like offices and startups and all that stuff, right? So I said, okay, that's a non-negotiable for me. But here's the catch. If I'm going to start a business, who would want to work there? Right? The boss gets to, surf for 2.5 hours, but like everyone else has to be in the office. Fuck that. I wouldn't work there. You shouldn't work there. And so these principles around, you could say that they originated from a place of selfishness. So like, what does Khe want? But I will say, like, I became an entrepreneur in part for selfish reasons to do what I wanted. And if I was going to leave the very isolated cocoon of solopreneurship and to add people into the family, I would have to do it in a way that honors everything that I believe to be true for them. And so it actually became super easy. It's like, what are the non-negotiables for me? And they're very principled, human principles. And then, soliciting feedback with my team, because theirs might be slightly different. Sometimes they hear me say this and they're like, well, you have accumulated some savings from working on Wall Street. But like, we want to make money. Don't get it twisted. We're here to make money, but we're not here to make money at sacrificing at all costs. And so let's make sure that we're crystal clear as a team where that line is. And that line can be in the vacation policy. That line can be in the principles and how we treat each other. That line is in the way where we don't use email internally. That's a rule. You are not allowed to email your colleague, full stop, unless it's a forward, or there's an external person on the thread. So it really originated from these first principles. And these first principles come from what I remember us talking from in the first episode is around like deep self-awareness of what sets you off, what makes you fly, what brings you joy, how do you want to spend your time? Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to one bullet point.
Nah, it's good. It's very helpful to give that context. How long have you been running now with this new group, this new team?
Yeah. So in July of the pandemic, so that's July 2020, is when I hired a virtual assistant. And that virtual assistant, her name is Jane, became our community and course manager. I can't remember the exact date, but probably sometime like a year ago. And then in the dates are so blurry. In 2021, I was hiring a lot of contractors. So contractors helped me develop syllabus, contractors for marketing, contractors for the newsletter, contractors around business strategy, and I have a bunch of coaches, business coaches. And I like paying for help and training. I invest a lot of money to get one-on-one training, and a bunch of those contractors kind of said, they're like, we'd love to like join you full time, because to me it was nice to have contractors because there wasn't that commitment and all the stuff you have to build around. But contractors are awesome. They are awesome too, because they were delivering and we had a good relationship, and you could almost view it as like a trial run for both parties. Right. And so a bunch of these contractors, who by the way were all former students of our course. So they're kind of like, all the recruiting so far has all been within the community, which is another crazy thought. And I don't see that changing for the interim future, because the course has gotten so big. So there were contractors, and they wanted the commitment of like a monthly paycheck. They didn't want like the eat what you kill mentality, and they were willing to put away their other contracting work if I could provide their financial needs. Likewise, I loved them as contractors, and I was starting to see the limits of contractors, right? Because the thing about contractors, they have a very narrow scope. And if the scope is redesign the curriculum, and the next day the website breaks, and you're like, I just need someone to update the About Me page. The contractor is not expected to do that. And if, you're kind of violating the terms of agreement on both parties if you do that. Now you can modify the contract and so on. But I guess the bigger point is that the contractors were not bought into the vision of what we were building, right? And they were, because they wanted to work there. And I kind of was like, you know what? I would love to have people that are bought into the vision of the company. I would love to have people that will be athletes, right? And they'll go where the ball's at, right? And I would love to make a long-term commitment to someone and have them make one back to us, right? Loyalty, both ways, two-sided loyalty. And so, but I was really dragging my feet, because first of all, it's in the United States, it's expensive to put people on, like the taxes, the health insurance, the benefits, like it's a lot. Just the amount of filings with remote, you have to file with every state where you have employees. If an employee changes states, you have to change the state filings. Like it's just a lot of like, $10 work. Right. And then there was the fear, right? The fear is like, if I'm going to hire someone, some people were quitting their jobs to do this full time. If they're going to do that, like, and this doesn't work in 6 months, I can't just let them go. I mean, legally I could, but I'm not the kind of person that is okay with that. But at the same time, I couldn't just like dig in my pockets and just like keep spending more money if for some reason the business wasn't working as planned. So there was so much trepidation around the commitment, the financial commitment, which is the business commitment I had made to people. The being terrified of like the death by 1,000 cuts of all the little administrative things that needed to happen, and a bit of self-doubt that's like, I've never been an entrepreneur that has like built and recruited and given performance review and all that stuff before. So a bit of self-doubt on that. But finally, I gathered the courage. And in fact, it was it was inevitable, because the course was growing too quickly. So I had to, or else something was gonna royally break if I didn't have a supporting team. And so my hand kind of I'm using huge air quotes here, got forced.
Mm. It's funny, right? Because, and then you were like, okay, I'm going to start going on a bunch of podcasts. I need to talk about this.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, so a few things happened. One is, so my 10K work framework. So as I hired people, immediately it freed up time to do 10K work. Right? Because I had been updating the website. Now I can ask someone else to do it. Mm-hmm. I had been, modifying launch sequences or tweaking ConvertKit or all that. Now I didn't have to do that. I wasn't doing it anymore. So I had all this time. And so with this time, I'm like, well, what's the highest leverage activity that I can be doing? And I had this huge list. I was like YouTube and guest writing and getting on people's podcasts and, updating our lead magnets and getting a new visual identity for the website. I had like a giant list. And I kind of went through each one and I was like, okay, what's the highest leverage activity that also fits into the parameters? What if this was easy? Like I find it enjoyable. And it's with people who I find energizing. So that's kind of how we landed here. And the excitement of like, I want to tell a story. And look, I mean, there's a huge advantage of telling the stories because it helps us recruit. It helps us get students. It helps us get subscribers. It helps you and I, continue to bond as friends. Right. And most importantly, which is the crux of RadReads, it can inspire someone to do something differently.
You mentioned on Twitter that it's really the most important job you realize is recruiting. Mm-hmm. How did you come across or realize that recruiting is going to be your number one priority moving forward?
So I always knew this with venture-backed startups because, you raise a Series A and you have like, a couple $100,000 in the bank and then you have like $3 million a week later. And you see like, I don't know, look at Maven, or I think they raised more than it. They went from like 4 people in a room to like a jobs posting page of like 25 jobs, like literally overnight. And so I always knew that was the case if you had external funding, because that's the whole point is you try to accelerate this. You try to accelerate it into as small as a window as possible because the VCs want their money back. They want the exit. But I said to myself, this is different because like there's no investors. And we have raised our hands and said, we're not trying to grow just for the sake of growing. Every time we use the word growth internally, it's preceded by the word sustainable. So sustainable growth. So if I'm going to burn myself out to grow, that's not sustainable growth. If we're going to work our butts off on the weekend, that's not sustainable growth. That's growth, but it's not sustainable because we believe, and our core values are that it's what the point you just read. We will like turn into worker, soulless, unhealthy peons. And that's not what we signed up for. So I thought that with a bootstrapped business that would just grow much slower, I thought I'd hire maybe 1, if lucky, 2 more people this year. So I'd have plenty, and it would be like towards the end of the year. But we hit the ground running. We have 2 businesses now. We have our course business, and our course had a record launch. Why? Because I have superstars on my team. So we actually made more money than we thought we would. Next, we started a second business that I was super conservative. I'm a very conservative. It might not sound like I'm a conservative guy. I'm a very conservative guy.
No, it sounds like that, at least to me.
Yeah.
You're like, we're going to grow, but we're going to grow slowly. That doesn't sound like, sounds very conservative to me.
That's true. Yeah. No, it's definitely true. So then we started the second business and we had like very low revenue targets for it. And in 2 months, we hit like the we're tracking to like the mid-year point already in 2 months.
Let me ask you something, Khe, because why do you think that you set expectations lower than what reality often shows you?
Wow. So you know that Tim Urban post, happiness equals reality minus expectations?
Yeah, it's great.
So I think there's a part of me that self-hedges. I think that we talked about this in the first podcast. Like, I grew up very shy, very skinny, like couldn't date, like kind of like the nice guy. I want to be his friend, but couldn't see myself with him, like that kind of guy. And so I wasn't very confident. Plus, I came from, I'm second child of first generation immigrants. So my parents were very hardworking, but they didn't have the self-confidence in just their stature in the U.S., Cambodians in the U.S., first generation with no family members here. So I grew up in New York, it was like lower middle class, but I never really felt, because I was so like scared and, physically weak looking, or weak, maybe I was weak. I was just always nervous, right? I was just like a nervous kid. I was like nervous of getting jumped, like on my walk home from school. I was nervous whenever it came like student dance time, like, oh, I'm going to be the one loser that like doesn't have a date, and so it's just like always had this nervousness. You could view it as like a lack of belonging. You could view it as like insecurity. You could view it as a form of trauma. I don't know what the right label is for it, but I never felt complete as a child. And then we can get into a much longer conversation into that's like the fire behind a lot of, like the early fire behind my ambition was to feel complete.
Yeah. When do you feel most complete?
Oh, when I'm meditating.
When you're meditating.
Yeah.
Interesting.
For sure. I think when we shared some tweets about Ram Dass.
Yes.
I'm starting, and this might be a little too far off the reservation for some people listening, but I'm starting to see the limitations of the rational mind, right? Where everything needs to fit into a form. Like, I am happy, I am sad. It's like, well, what if that's just language? Right? And what if you were unable to communicate the language of happy and sad with words? Would you still be happy? Right? There's no concept of happiness because you can't describe it with a form. Right? Here's another way to think about it that I always find quite weird. This is a Ram Dass question that comes from Sri Ramana Maharshi, another guru in India. And the question is, who am I? Right? It's a meditative question. Who am I? So you could be like, who am I? Well, I'm Khe. I'm Khe Hy, right? Creator of RadReads. Okay. Well, what if I change my name and I reverse the letters to EHK? And I'm like, I'm Ek. You're like, has anything changed? Like, no, I'm Ek. Well, you're K, you're Ek. No, it's kind of like a trivial example, right? Let's take another one. I'm losing my hair. You can't see it now, and I'm not going to grace your viewers with my bald spot. But yeah, it looks great because I know how to look in the right angle. And we could talk about the trauma that when you know that there's a wrong angle, you can talk about the trauma that comes with that, or the suffering that comes with that. Suffering would be the right word. But let's say it's going to happen. One day I'm going to have to go rock style, Bruce Willis style. And it's probably, some people would argue now's the time. That is going to be a death of an identity. The identity of Khe with hair. Will I still be Khe? I'm sure a lot of people, 99.9% of the people will be like, oh yeah, that's Khe. But I'll be honest, like, I remember Tiger when he had hair. Right? Like, I remember Nadal when he had like those gorgeous locks. Right? And I'm not saying I love them less or admire them less, but the small part of them views me differently. Now, whether that matters, no, it doesn't mean a damn thing. But again, is K without hair the same as K with hair? We could go a little bit further. Let's say I have a stroke and I can't talk anymore. Am I still K? I can't go on your podcast. Am I still K? You could go a step further. Let's say I'm on a ventilator and my family can still come and hold my hand and they can see my heart moving, but they know that I can't see them or spot them. Am I still K? The thing about this is that this all is predicated on the fact that K as a form actually exists. Right? Like, I will still exist when my body is gone. My kids will still have memories about me. People will still read my work. They'll still listen to the replays of our interview. Right?
We're immortal, baby.
So, yeah, exactly, right? Legends. But if you're attached to the form being K looking a certain way, K being a certain way, K being able to express his thoughts a certain way, what if, and this, I don't know if you find my argument convincing or not. I'm not sure if I believe myself, what I'm saying, but I'm open to the possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so to go back to the question is, where do you feel the most complete? It is in meditation. Because in meditation, you kind of strip away all of that. You strip away K without hair. You strip away K's thoughts. You strip away K's kids holding his hand. It's all gone. Or you could say it's all there. I don't know. And I'm trying my hardest to explain this to you with words. But there's in that moment, I know you're a meditator, there's something about it that can't be described with words.
You're right. What is that? Why is the fact that when we have no inputs, we have nothing, no sensory experience, I guess you could smell or hear, but when you're not really smelling or hearing much, why is it when there's no sensory inputs, we feel the most whole?
Man, that is, I mean, I think there's I think a lot of people would disagree with that statement. I wouldn't, but I think a lot of people would. They probably have not spent that time alone, right? It's Pascal who said, all of man's troubles come from their inability to spend 15 minutes by themselves. We're 2 for 2 in bringing that quote up, which is a great quote in our episodes. Yeah. Oh, nice. See? Or I've got a good PKM. I think that could be a clue that there are limits to the rational mind. There are limits to logic. There are limits to science. You know, there's more. Maybe it's a little bit more. Maybe this whole thing, maybe you can go Elon Musk that this whole thing's a simulation. I don't know. Maybe there's more. And I think that for probably like 35 years of my life, I refused to believe that there was more. I'm like, show me the proof. Show me the formula. Show me the DNA, the whatever. Show me the logic. And I think with age and more meditation and more Ram Dass, to be frank, I listen to those talks like an hour a day, like every single day. Wow. And I listen to the same one like 7 times, like over and over and over again. It's like a form in addition to meditation. So I now, with age, with spiritual guidance, with, the way the world ebbs and flow, like I'm open to the possibility that there's something that cannot be explained by words, logic, and formula. I just don't know what it is.
Makes sense. To me, at least. You talk about Ram Dass, and this, we'll link down below the 2 talks that he does, which I think you're referring to, which I listened to in the past week, maybe in the last 48 hours even. And, he touches on something that we touched on in this conversation, which is like, you're starting to get bald. And he talks about growing old is suffering in a society that worships youth. Mm-hmm. And that's powerful.
Oh, man.
So, but he also says that the closer you are to suffering, the closer you are to being awakened.
Mm-hmm.
And that, both of those concepts really made me think, really made me step back. What do you think about all that?
I mean, the aging thing is scary, right? This
Why?
Culture. Well, if you're locked into the belief of rationality, the day you're gone, boom, lights out, game over, right?
Yeah.
And if you believe in rationality, I would imagine many of your listeners believe in high agency. Like, why do you think that there's so many Silicon Valley people that are trying to live forever? Like, they believe that they could control, like, the universe, right?
Whoa.
Like, why do it's almost exclusively Silicon Valley people that want to live forever. And I used to be, I'm not a Silicon Valley person, but I used to be one of those people that wanted to live forever. Now I have like no desire to live forever. And we should circle back on that point. But why is aging scary, right? Well, You're on this earth and you have an ego, right? The ego is, I'm a good entrepreneur. I'm a good surfer. I'm a good dad. People like me. I'm handsome. I'm fit. I have no hair. You know, like you have this ego, right? And death is the ultimate destroyer of ego, right? So why do you think people scramble to have buildings named after them, right? Why do you think they donate entire wings to universities? Death, like the fact that your ego, and again, your ego is wrapped into your physical body. They're the same in the rationalist's mind. Boom, incinerated. That's terrifying. If you believe that there's nothing else, it's terrifying. My friend Brent Beshore, he once wrote it. He's a man of God. He wrote it. It takes a lot of faith to be an atheist.
A lot of faith to be an atheist. Yeah. Wow. That's a good one.
Right? Like,
yeah,
that's a good one. It's powerful. And so why are we so, let me turn around. Are you scared of dying?
No.
Bless you, lucky man. A lot of driven people are terrified of it. In fact, the reason they're so driven is because they're terrified of it.
What's going to happen? So right?
Yeah.
Like what? Like you're scared of some. I think the most rational approach is just to take what's in front of you in this moment. Mm-hmm. And a fear of death is so often when you're not dealing with cancer or like something life-threatening in that moment. A fear of death is so often not in this moment. So an amount of naivete about that's just not a problem for right now. Right now I got a podcast I got to do. But that's not to say that when I'm alone with my thoughts that I'm like, oh, what's going to happen when you die? I'm not like trying to push that thought away, but but that's changed. I definitely was scared of death at some point. And I have to say that it's closely related to the time when I started meditating. Yeah. If I were to think about it.
I would definitely I share a similar experience. I was very, very afraid. And I think there was a few things, right? I think at the surface level, I was afraid of losing, of not being around. It made me sad to not be around my kids and my friends and my loved ones and so on. But if you think about it rationally, like you wouldn't even be there to know that you're missing it. So I think that's like one angle. Another was this kind of perspective of like not having fulfilled my potential. Right. And so it was less that I was scared of the act of dying itself, but more that there was this finite window to achieve my best self, or however you want to phrase that. And as that window was closing and I wasn't, being that best version of myself, it kind of scared me, or maybe it was more just like suffocating. Right. And then there's the ego part, which is like, I had this uncle, and I just, I adored him. He's like my favorite uncle, and he passed from cancer like 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember I was so sad and crying and thinking about him all the time. But one of the things I was the most sad about was that I knew that in a year, I wouldn't be as sad about it because I would have forgotten about him. And I knew that in 3 years, I might go an entire year without thinking about him, right? Or maybe thinking about him, on the anniversary of his death. And that scared me, not for him, but for me. I was like, no, I just want you to remember me. But then, like, what an I could feel like I'm getting animated because that's a scary thought. Like, I just want you to remember me. But I could also laugh at it because it's kind of hilarious, right? Because like, we're just like a pile of dust. And like this pile of dust is like, please at Christmas, talk about me, right? Like talk about this pile of dust, like to your grandkids. You're like, please don't forget me, right? And I don't know. I couldn't have laughed about this like 2 years ago. Definitely not like 4 years ago. But I think it comes down to like it's this egoic death. So the same thing about like my fear of going, rock style on my hair is actually just taking one step closer towards killing off an identity, killing off an ego that like made me feel who I was, who I am, who, represents me to the outside world. And so I think death is like, I think death and baldness are actually the feelings that you confront are actually very similar. I did not think we were going to go in this direction, but
why
like
not?
I said, I'm here for it.
That's
what I love about you, man, is that you go there, man. And I love it. Like I told you before, I'll go anywhere, man. I'm all terrain.
I think when you're comfortable with yourself, you're comfortable to ask and also answer questions that we push aside. And this is what I noticed about myself when I stopped meditating, because I wasn't as comfortable with myself. So I couldn't ask deeper questions. I didn't want to go there because I was just going to push it away. And that manifests itself in the podcast, I'm sure, if I listen. And it also manifested itself in real life when you actually have real conversations with people you love. So I think that the more that I get to know myself, the more comfortable I am with myself, the more I can have real conversations with guests and about things that are troubling to them or things that they're thinking about.
And that's why the quote that you said at Ram Dass is like, he said it differently. The one I remember is differently, like suffering is grace. Right. But that suffering brings you closer. And I think he says something like, you cannot love others if you don't love yourself, and you can't understand other people's suffering if you don't understand your own suffering.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
And just to add a point of levity to this deep conversation, because I'm also here for the levity, I once saw one of the comedians, I forget who, like Amy Schumer or someone like her, it's like people who hold in, who like don't go deep within themselves, thinking they don't want to know and they want to like bury it back in. It's like trying to hold in a fart.
Yeah.
Because like you're walking around uncomfortably and you just know at any given point in time that the motherfucker is going to go.
And you snap at people and you're like, what? And you're like, what's going on? And you have such a surface level of what is possible and what is actually happening because you can't recognize the reality of the situation. You know, Ram Dass also said something in that talk about the aim of life in the East is to prepare for the moment of death. And he talked about reincarnation. And I didn't understand that part. I was saying, Ram Dass, what do you mean there? I gotta ask. And he goes, no questions. Like, you know what I'm talking about. At one point, It's like, no questions. And I was like, what do you mean by reincarnation? What do you mean by preparing for the moment of death? I assumed it had something to do with, you know, you meditate, you get close to the place of stillness. Once you do, you're more comfortable with the unknown. But what did all that mean to you? And what's your take on the reincarnation and what he says about death in general?
So I don't have a strong, I listen to a lot of Dharma talks and talks like that, but I don't really like study Buddhism and Eastern philosophy and all that. So please take everything I say as just one, you know, buffoon's opinion. But I mean, here's a strange thought is the minute we come out of the womb, we've begun dying. Right? So when he says we spend our entire lives preparing for death, it's because we literally are dying from the moment we're born. Right? And that's not a bad thing. That like anything that has an end date is dying the minute it starts, you know, at different rates and different, you know, paths. So I think that's one thing, but what I hear, I don't have a view about the reincarnation, but I have an openness to that there's something else, right? And I don't believe in any traditional. I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. I believe there's something else, and I have no idea what it is, and I can't explain to you in words. But I believe that there's something else. I think in that point, what I hear is that we're learning to deal with the death of our ego, right? Which is like our sense of self. And it's actually interesting, right? Because, you know, you can have a kid and, you know, the kids don't have an ego in the early days, right? Like they don't care what other people think. They're not like, they don't want to be investment bankers. They, you know, there's a certain point where, you know, they'll say stupid stuff without like feeling judged or laughed at, right? You could even tell like, oh, you have such fat, chubby cheeks or like all that. And then like they don't care, right? So there's a point where the ego hasn't formed, and the ego is not necessarily a bad thing because it's like who you are. But in the second noble truth of Buddhism is when we cling to something. Suffering comes from clinging. Yeah. So when we cling to the ego, or we cling to the fact that we have hair, we had a full head of hair, or when we cling to the fact that we were a managing director and now we're just, you know, some small time entrepreneur, the suffering comes from that clinging, right? And what I hear in that phrase that you just described is letting go of the ego that keeps you so attached. Like, why, Khe, do you care so much about this hair thing? Right? Why? Why do you care so much? Like, seriously, why do you care? And it's the ego, right? I want to walk into a room and I want someone to say like, oh, I think that guy's a handsome guy. Or I want to go onto a YouTube channel. I want to be like, you know, that guy looks dope. Or, you know, I want someone to be like, oh, you look younger than your age, right? I want that, right? That's the desire, right? I'm clinging to the youth. right? In that example.
Yeah. The Work by Byron Katie.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's on my list of, I've never read it. I'm familiar with some of the arguments, but I've never read it. It's on my list.
Yeah. I read it in January, and it really, I love the idea of it, which is kind of, there's a lot to it, and there's questions you ask and all this, but what I really took from it was the turnarounds, which basically means like take the statement you have and turn it around. Meaning that like if you want somebody to say, you have great hair or you look so young, imagine and feel what it would be like if I said, you look so old. And really sit with that. And I think the purpose is if you can get comfortable with you look so old, well, then you don't fear not looking old. And that's just a powerful frame to operate in.
Yeah.
And can make you feel whole in that moment because it's like completing the puzzle.
Totally.
In the puzzle, you have, in one section, you have, okay, I can only look young. But if you then fill it in and you say, no, I want to look old. I actually can't wait to look old. Well, now you have the complete puzzle. And yeah, what do you think about that?
The first thing that comes to mind, it's like, it's exposure therapy, right? Someone was like, you should just take a mirror and just stare at your bald spot all day. And then you'll just get used to it. I'm like, that sounds like, I honestly think I'd rather like kill myself or like not kill myself, but that sounds like hell on earth. So sorry to be so dramatic, but that sounds like hell. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. So obviously it shows how there's still so much suffering there, right? There's so much like fart being held in right there. Just like waiting to go, right? Yeah. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, I think there's something about like disarming language, right? So what came to mind is like the inner critic, right? When I was much harsher on myself in my 20s and less in my 30s, and right now, for the most part, I'm quite kind to myself with my inner monologue. But part of my 30s and the dampening of the inner critic was to just change the language. So instead of saying, you suck, I can't believe only, 200 people read that blog post, I would say like, isn't it funny that only 200 people read that blog post? Or sometimes I even gave it a name. I called it Mr. Salty Poop. Like Mr. Salty Poop thinks it's so ridiculous that only 200 people read that blog. And then I would just laugh at myself. But and again, it kind of shows the power and limits of language, because the language kind of like, you can defang the language by just replacing you with Mr. Salty Poop thinks. So that's the second thing that comes to mind. And then the third is like, what if like this kind of non-dual way of thinking, what if there's something beyond, hair, no hair, young, old, happy, sad, right? And so I think about this, we have in our course, in our method, we have this concept of 10K questions. These are the big questions that you ask yourself, and you kind of meditate on them. One of mine is, who am I? Another one is, I apply it more in a business sense, is, am I playing the right game? Right? Because I could get caught up in the game of entrepreneurship, and I've told you I'm not optimizing for max profits, but sometimes I forget, and then I like go hard because I'm in that mode, because then I need to remind myself that I'm playing the wrong game.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the right game and the wrong game. And then my coach asked me this question. It blew my mind. He goes, what's beyond games? I was like, holy fuck, you motherfucker. What's beyond games? That's kind of like a who am I question, because it kind of takes the whole system of like good game, bad game, and throws it out the window and says like, you're actually asking the wrong question. And so this is not a critique of of Byron Katie or anything like that. It's just, that's what I hear. And I think, when we started earlier with the limits of the rational mind and the limits of using words to describe happy, sad, like I'll give you another example where my wife and I will volunteer occasionally at a hospice center. So it's where people are in their last they have 7 to 10 days to live, and they're off all the, life sustaining, usually some sort of cancer. They just kind of die in peace in this home. And we go there, and it's really like a very beautiful, serene, mundane, dare I say, experience. Because sometimes the patients are barely conscious. So you're just sitting in the room, maybe holding their hand. They can't talk. You're not even sure if they recognize that, you're holding their hand, that you're in the room. And sometimes they're chatting your ear off, they're one of your friends. And other times you just sweep the floors because there's no one there or everyone's sleeping. So you go there, and people always ask me, what's it like? And it's actually very hard to describe it. The first thing is it must be so scary to be this close to death. Yeah. And to be this 7 days from death. Right? You're going to come back the next time, the person will be gone. There's no doubt in your mind. So it's not scary. It's beautiful, but not in the typical sense of the word beautiful. It's definitely not fun, but there's a lightness and a peacefulness to it all. You feel like you're in service, but it's still agitating. Whatever you feel about death, it's definitely, you're reminded of it when you're there. So there's a discomfort. And again, that kind of goes with one's own fear of death, whether that's a mild discomfort or a raging discomfort. But there's just this very complex set of emotions that comes from that 2-hour visit. And I cannot use words to describe them.
I think that's why a lot of people seeking truth are so keen on learning different languages, because you start to realize that just one language can't possibly wrap up all of human experience, and that more people, more situations can point the finger to what is actually true or give you a more complete picture into truth. Have you learned any new languages or considered it?
Silence. I've learned the language of silence. I have not. I'm fluent in French, and so I can see certain instances of they're close enough. But Germanic languages, I think. I'm not a linguist. But I definitely, I think it's Steph Smith who has an entire website about words that exist in one language that don't exist in another language.
Yeah. Super cool.
And so I personally haven't, and it's because I got two young kids. But I do think a lot about the power of words. And as a writer, I'm actually a little bit more careful about how I might wield, I don't wield myself into any controversies or things like that. But I think as an example, copywriting, right? Copywriting can be very manipulative, and it kind of wields the power of words to kind of get you, the writer, the outcome that you desire. So that's a tangent, but I've definitely thought about the power of words in many cases.
Yeah. No, and on that tangent, how great is it when the copywriter is aiming to do something that uplifts other people? And this copywriting's one example, writing's one example, but so is podcasting, so is videos. It's all aiming to so often aiming to get somebody to do something, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why so many people love your podcast. That's why many people love RadReads, right? I listened to like in my 30s, I listened to so much Tim Ferriss, and he was really influential. Like he introduced me to a lot of these thinkers and these different ideas and so on. And now I don't listen to Tim Ferriss. I've outgrown it and moved on. But I have so much admiration for what he brought into my life at that phase in my life. So there's kind of the way that you talk to people and let them see alternative visions for themselves in a way that is genuine, in a way that is helpful, in a way that is relatable, right? I think like the thing about some of the best podcasters is how relatable they are.
Yeah. And
you feel like they're your friend, right? Because they just understand you. So on we started this conversation with copywriting. What is copywriting? Copywriting is a true sense of empathy of your target's pains and dreams, right? And by the way, that's not so different than being a good writer. The difference is that with copywriting, you're trying to like lead them to take action versus fiction. You're doing it for the emotion that it engenders.
Yeah, or to get somebody to take an action, right? Like fiction,
totally.
Why do you think you've stopped listening to Tim Ferriss?
So I have people ask me often, what's the best book that you read, or what's the best books you read that helped you quit your job, or what's the best book? And honestly, Danny, my consumption of just information has plummeted. And I can't exactly pinpoint why. And so I would say like Tim Ferriss, that falls into that overall bucket, but I don't read a ton of nonfiction, barely read any nonfiction. When I do read, it's usually fiction and more spiritual texts, which I kind of read over, and they just it's not even like you don't start and end them. You just kind of always just get in there, and they're just kind of always with you, right? Like the Tao Te Ching, like I've read every page in it, but I don't like sit down to read it. I'll see it. I'm like, oh, just, read it for 10 minutes and sit on a koan. So I think part of it is that just the overall volume has gone down. And I could share why I think that's gone down. A few things is that I definitely spend more time in silence. And so I spend more time meditating. I do a bunch of breathing exercise, like breathing practices. Then I surf. I take walks mostly without headphones now. So in general, like I think that this is a good question. I think that something happened in my life where I just wanted less noise. And so I just turned down the volume. And the obvious culprits were, I never watched a lot of YouTube, and I never watched a lot of TV, but the obvious culprits were reading nonfiction and podcasts. I've swapped some of it, right? So I just told you I listen to like an hour of Ram Dass every day. So I'm clearly still listening to podcasts, just different ones. I think too that it's going to be, like I said, it's always the truth here. I do think that I think I burnt myself out on a lot of like personal growth materials, which is ironic because I create so many of those. I built a business around that. And, you know, I know that there are listeners who are my readers, who are my students, and they know that I'm always very honest about it, is that, you know, first of all, I don't need a lot of new inputs to be able to write about those ideas. And if anything, some of these newer inputs that I'm taking in are actually watching the ideas mature, right? I would have never talked about the limits of the rational mind a year ago. I wouldn't have been in a position. I didn't even know that was something I cared about. So I think like anything, right? There's seasons.
Yeah.
Right. And I think my seasons, you know, I'm 42 and a half. I think my seasons of like go hard or go home, like go big, like I think that season of my life has closed. And I think it's much more qualified now, right? It's like the 20s is like growth at all costs, right? 30s would be, you know, growth, and then 40s is like sustainable growth, and 50s will be like, who cares about growth? Right? And so I think I'm just kind of processing all of these seasons of life, sitting with a lot of these questions, I get so much joy of sitting, like even a good book now, you know, there's still a trade-off between meditation and a good book. I might pick meditation. I mean, usually it's the most compelling option to me.
Your mind is always the best teacher, is something Corey Allen says loosely, which is a great quote. Back to the question of what's beyond the games. What was the thing you said or meditated on or figured out? Is there anything? What was the answer to that?
I bet there's some like Buddhist koan that's like, you know, if you search for the answer, you'll never find the answer. You know, there definitely is something like that. The answer is I don't know. I think that there are a few things that kind of bubble up. One that I've kind of worked with one of my teachers is genuine care. So like beyond like all the games, like what's the thread that unifies all of my activities is that I genuinely care. So I genuinely care to give your listeners like the best conversation possible with nothing. I mean, obviously I want to grow my list, but like even if you were like, there's zero, you know, no CTAs allowed, I would still be here. Right. So genuine care for my students, genuine care for my crafts, right? Like when I take surfing, like I want to be a craftsman at it, not because I want to win any competition. Sorry, that boat has sailed. But I want to genuinely care about how I'm showing up with it. So that's one thing that comes up. I think it's related to it. And I really want to bring that ethos into the company that we're building for my colleagues and for our customers and our students. Another one that comes up is service. And in service, you can hear flavors of love, right? And I do, it's a pathway that, you know, worth exploring. Like I do feel like I have a lot of love to give, but I'm not always sure that the love that I'm giving is like always truly unalterated and unfiltered, right? Like it's not just like this boundless, like when you listen to like a Ram Dass, it's just like this boundless, like I don't have that. And I don't know if I'm striving to get to that point. I consciously I'm not. Like I don't want to be I don't want to be a guru or anything, a spiritual teacher or anything like that. But I do, you know, there's something that connects there with that, just like that love for other people. Like something like it's gotten very hard for me to kill a bug. Because of this love for other sentient beings. Right? And again, some people might be listening to this and be like, why did you kill bugs in the first place? And other people might be like, like, who cares? It's a bug. They don't have a consciousness. And right there, that opens, it's like, it's a bug? You know, how do you know that a mosquito doesn't have a consciousness? Right? Who are you? Who are we to say that mosquitoes don't have consciousness? Just because like the science book says that. Right? So I bring that up not because I bring that because love is I think of these things as like little filaments. And just like they're like little thin filaments of light, and you just kind of like see them and you're like, that's something, there's something there.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I struggle to put it in words, but I know that there's something there. And maybe what's beyond games question is just to keep exploring keep exploring these filaments and not writing about them and not talking about them and not, turning them into businesses and just being with them. Again, that's a theory. People might be listening to this like, man, this dude's gone off this. But for the record, I've done no like psychedelics or anything. I want to, but I haven't. But I think like sitting in silence for many, many years with teaching, I have some amazing teachers, will shift your thinking.
Talk to me about
here's another thing though.
Yeah.
Is it'll shift your thinking, but I still want to be a badass motherfucking entrepreneur, right? Like, don't let that get lost in it all. Like, I think people assume, again, the duality is like, well, you could be super spiritual and quiet and not read a lot and not read fiction and, not listen to Tim Ferriss and like, but then you can't be an entrepreneur. Like, what do you mean? Like, you could do it in your own terms. And so like, I love this like weird balance that I'm able to find, that again, I think a lot of it just comes with age and like knowing myself better, to be comfortable with the fact that like, the certain decisions that I've made being atypical ones, or just like bucking the conventional path of like, no, you have to read nonfiction if you want to be a good entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think anyone has said that. I mean, perhaps people have said that you have to read nonfiction, otherwise you're not a good entrepreneur. Yeah. But it's a narrative that is created in our own mind. Because I personally never once did I ever say, okay, if I need to be an entrepreneur, I need to read nonfiction. I just like, I enjoy this book. This book is interesting. And I'm curious, like, do you think you created this in your mind that you needed to do certain things to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I'll start by saying that I have empirical proof of this. If you just did like a Google search, like best top books for entrepreneurs, Reddit, or just to like get through all the SEO crap, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a book of fiction on any of those lists. So I think there is a prevailing cultural narrative that like, you need to read Shoe Dog and The Hard Thing About Hard Things and whatever. So I think there's some of it there. The other empirical data point that I have is in our course, we have one of our best lectures is why is it so hard to take a walk without headphones? That's the name of the lecture. I'll share the post with you for the show notes after. And we do a poll on fiction. And it's usually 25% of the people, 75% of the people have read less than 2 fiction books in the past year. And then we ask them why. And this is why the lecture is called, Why is it so hard to take a walk without headphones? Is that they equate fiction to not having an outcome, right? So you read nonfiction, you read Shoe Dog, and you're like, oh, this is how Phil Knight approached marketing. And you read, the hard thing about hard things. This is how Ben Horowitz approaches one-on-ones. And you read Alchemist and Alchemy, and you're like, this is how he approaches brands. But you read, Candide by Voltaire, and what does that make you better at, right? And I would actually make an argument that there's a lot that it makes you better at, but that's missing the point. The point is you read it because it's beautiful fiction that like doesn't have to bring you joy. And so the empirical data, of which I used to and still sometimes am very beholden to that mindset, is that you need to do things that have outcomes, right? And it's not enough to do something just for the joy, right? You can't go hiking unless you're listening to a podcast between Danny Miranda and Khe Hy that's teaching you how to cultivate better self-awareness, right? If you're going hiking, even it comes from my dad, dude. My dad, whenever I say I went hiking, my dad's like, I don't go hiking. I only walk to places that I need to get to. Right? So there's this belief, and not everyone has it, but I would imagine a lot of people in our shared communities have it, is that to do something, it has to have some kind of outcome to it. And if you're doing something just for the joy of it, you should feel guilty about it. Like it's indulgent. Right? And so that's the empirical evidence that I have. Where did it come from for me? I just told you, right? My dad shits on hiking, right? Because he thinks it's pointless, right? So you could imagine what he thinks about my 2 to 3 hours, 1 to 2 hours of meditation every day.
Yeah. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot is how do we take the opinions of those close to us who we respect and love so much with a grain of salt when we have almost been brought up to believe that they are godlike figures who are all-knowing.
Oh, man, I have so many thoughts. I was just talking about this today. Again, from the Ram Dass podcast. He quotes a line from Kabir, the poet, and the line goes, "You could do what you want to another human being, but always keep them in your heart." And I mean, I need to like meditate on that one for a while, but it came up in struggling to say no, right? A lot of people listening to this podcast struggle to say no. I did a poll in our course today. 75% struggle to say no. And so you can do what you want to another human being. You can say no to them. Someone, I use the example, I get a lot of like, hey, can I pick your brain about entrepreneurship? And unfortunately, I have to say no to a lot of those. And also you can say no, but hold that person in your heart, right? Just because I'm not able to share 30 minutes of my time to talk about entrepreneurship, I hold you in my heart. I respect you. I love you as a fellow human being. So that would be one way, is like you can disagree with someone, you can criticize someone even, you can say no to someone, but you must always hold them in your heart. And he actually tells this funny story. I actually do this. I don't know if you do any compassion meditation, metta meditation. Have you ever? Not that I'm aware of. You got to try this. So if you just Google metta, METTA, it's also sometimes called loving kindness meditation. And it basically holds other people in your heart and just projects, it sends them love.
Yeah.
And so I would close my eyes and I would say, Danny, may you be loved. May you be safe. May you be happy. And may you live with ease and in peace. And then I'll do that. Lisa, my wife. Soraya, my daughter. Lou, my friend. I just do that. The first time, dude, I did that once. I was jet lagged. I did it for 90 minutes.
Wow.
Because I couldn't sleep. And I straight out started to hallucinate. It was like so fucking weird. Never happened again, unfortunately. But that is this like, and you can feel it. Like you can feel, and again, if you're going to be limited by the rational brain, well, Danny didn't feel it. You just wasted your time. Right. But that's kind of missing the point, right? Is that there's just something beautiful in this meditation, and it kind of captures this Kabir spirit. And so he tells a story in this same episode where he has this like shrine. Ramdas has this shrine, and there's like his guru, and there's Jesus Christ, and then he actually. It's funny. It's that this way we don't have to bring politics into it, but you can guess Ram Dass' politics. He had someone, which the crowd laughed. I had never heard of him, the person, and Bob Dole. And so he goes and he's like telling the story. It's so funny. He's like he has a slightly different mantra, but he's like Buddha. It's it's so great to serve you. I love you. May you have a beautiful day. And he does that for Christ. And then he gets to Bob Dole and he's like, "Hello, Bob. I hope you have a good day." But it's kind of that same, it's the same feeling, right? Like, and it's like, can you hold someone in your heart and care about them? And that's like infinite, right? We have it in our heart. The Buddhists will make the argument that the heart is capable of infinite love, right? And you and I can debate whether that's true or not, but that's kind of missing the point. Is like, just, I'm open to that possibility. I don't know if it's true or if it's false, but I'm open. Why not? What does it hurt me to believe that might be possible? And so to go back to your question, which was around like people having disagreeing views, and how do you still love them, or outdated views. There's a few random thoughts that I would bring up. One is, it's not your responsibility to make everyone happy. In fact, I would take it a step further. You cannot make someone happy. Because if someone is suffering inside, there's nothing you can say, do, buy for them to make that. They have to deal with their suffering themselves. Now, you can show them love. You can be caring. You can be compassionate. You can listen, right? You can be supportive. But you can't fix them, right? So there's this question of like control. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will struggle with, because we're like high agency people. Like, I want to be rich, and you become rich. And I want 50 million Twitter followers, 50,000 Twitter followers, and I will get 50,000. I want to build a company, and I will go build a fucking company, right? People do that. They believe that. But then but it's a rude awakening when you realize that doesn't extend to all parts of your life, especially death. But we won't come back to that word. We spent enough time on that. So you acknowledge that which is outside of your control, and you recognize that you cannot make someone happy, right? You can create the environment for them to be happy, but I cannot make you happy, right? If I could wire you $10 million, like, that wouldn't make you happy. It might make you temporarily, like it might make you smile, and it might change your life, but it's not going to change. If there's a suffering inside of you, it's not going to make that go away. And then the last one, this is probably like more wearing my manager hat, is, kind of like the Kim Scott radical candor, right? You can care about someone, but you can critique them with respect, right? And in fact, and this is actually one of our principles in our company, is to care personally, but challenge directly. Which means you don't like beat around the bush if someone made a mistake. Mm. You also don't tear into them, but you're just like, hey, there was a mistake that was made. These are the consequences. What shall we do so that this doesn't happen again? And then put it down. Right, don't let the egos and the intensity and the fire, the emotion, bubble up.
Yeah, Gary Vaynerchuk calls this kind candor, and he's like, "This is the one thing that I've had the most trouble with all my career, was being able to hold kindness with telling the truth to an employee who did something wrong, and that the situations in his life where someone has thought poorly of him have all been around kind candor." So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, right? You cannot deal with someone else's suffering until you deal with your own suffering, right? I mean, his inability to deal with kind candor is something in him to heal, right? Mm-hmm. Just like we all have it. It's not unique to him. I've shared many, many versions of mine with you all today.
Yeah, I also like what you mentioned it before, what Ram Dass did, which was meditate with a politician he didn't like. And just like, if you could give that person love, then you really could give anybody love, because you disagree so fundamentally with them.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely. I mean, we have a lot to learn about that in this moment in society right now.
Yeah. Anything else come to mind before we go to a close?
Ooh.
Any other topics you'd like to explore?
I mean, I would love to ask. I would love to ask you. What's your why? What motive? When I see someone having so much, external success, like I don't see the internal side of things, and I ask myself like what? I'm always just so curious. Like, what motivates? What's your why? Like, what motivates you to do what you're doing? Because you do it so well, and others recognize it. So I always wonder that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there was a time when I wasn't doing well, not so long ago, and I feel like I am doing well today, and I just want to put that out there, because that's the truth, and like how it looks externally might not how it feels internally. Yeah. And so, but what motivates me is to get to the place of internal peace and to stay there. Mm-hmm. That's today's truth. And I know that when I am internally whole, it will reflect externally, but that's not even why I'm trying to get there. So I'm trying to balance that, my Buddha nature, with also my social security number. So right now, my challenge is, how do I get paid to be internally whole? Is that something you think you could help me with, or like help me navigate?
Wow.
Like how does one be internally whole? Society does not necessarily give you credit for being internally whole. So how do you come to the place of making money from that?
Oof. Oh, wow. There's a few ways. So I would say that, there's like a lot of different ways to look at this, because in one way you could say, like, look, I am, insert X, a single mom or college grad, or like, I can't meditate for 90 minutes a day, or I can't hire spiritual teachers and like that. And, it's both true and it's false. Like, obviously I recognize that I have a lot of privilege, socioeconomically and financially and in many other dimensions to be able to do many of the things that we talked about today. But at the same time, a copy of the Upanishads and meditating for 2 hours a day is fucking free. And so there's this it might be one of these instances, and here's like a very open struggle. Like we could move to a tiny place with like a really low cost of living, and I wouldn't have to work. And we could, cook our own food, cook and grow our own food and homeschool our kids, whatever. And I wouldn't have to work again. But I don't want that. At least I don't want that today. And I don't necessarily want to spend 6 hours a day cultivating a spiritual practice. And maybe I think that will change as I get older. I could see that, like, in the near future, more of my day is spent on, it's already, the trend line's already moving that way. So I would say maybe, there's the element of financial security, right? And I forget, you live in tri-state area?
I live in New York with my parents at this precise moment.
So you live in New York, so high cost of living place, low cost of living arrangement in the moment. But like, we all, like, if you truly wanted to go on a journey to be more complete, it actually would not cost a lot of money. It's just that you'd have to let go of the conception that one has for their lives, whether that would be how you show up at, the school PTA meeting, what car you drive, having a car, where you eat, who cooks your food, on and on, travel. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so I think that there's like a bigger question of, why, how those desires are congruent with cultivating a deeper spiritual practice. And like I said, to me, they're still very compartmentalized, right? It's still like work first, but save, 2 to 3 hours for this other stuff. But if work bleeds over, the other stuff kind of goes down to like 1 hour or 30 minutes, right? So it's still like, I've made a very kind of, through my actions, I've made a very specific decision that, like, there's a lot about this life, whether it's like living in Southern California, whether it's being a solo entrepreneur, whether it's being a father of two, whether it's being, someone that like likes to do enjoyable things like travel, eat, and surf, right? So the two are kind of trying to find where they sit relative to one another. But I got to tell you that I've reached a point where there is basically nothing that I want that's physical, like clothes or shoes or computers or cars or even surfboards or lifting equipment. Like, there's nothing really that I want. Like, and I have a bunch of those things already, not like a ton of them. I have a car that works. And so once you remove that from the equation, you start to see that, I've started to see that there's a limit to what money can buy me in terms of enjoyment. Right. And that's in part because I do make a good living. So, full disclosure that I've had financial security for a while. But it's also like I've bought a lot of shit and realized it didn't make me happy. And so I've stopped doing that.
Just to interject real quick.
Yeah.
What do you think of the idea that in order to get to the point of realizing that money doesn't make you happy, you first need to have money?
I mean, it's really, right? It's like Jim Carrey said, like, everyone wants to be rich and famous until they're rich and famous, or something like that. It's easy.
Everybody should get rich and famous so that they realize that rich and fame is not the thing you want. But I think there's some truth to the fact that you can't really renounce something until you've already had it.
Agreed. And I think that's why, you and I bond so much about self-awareness and introspection, personal introspection, right? Because you could say, like, I want to be the next Bezos, right? And that will probably take you, if you're lucky and every single star aligns, like 30 years. If you started today. So what if after every quarter we did a little pulse check? Like, do you still really want this? Why do you want this? At what cost do you want this? Have you ever considered wanting something else? Does this make you smile, this pursuit? And maybe in Q1, you'd be like, no, it didn't make you smile, but I don't care. I want to be, I got, 29 years and 3/4 left. Just having those like little mile markers to check in on like what you want. Right? First, you got to know what you want. So kudos to that person for like being so emphatic and crystal clear that they want to be the next Bezos in 30 years. Assuming they've done like the deep analysis in their own heads as to why they want that. Right? But then would you just like blindly go on that path for 30 years and not check in with yourself and be like, is this still what I want? And acknowledge the fact that the world is a very fast changing, rapidly changing place, and a lot of things are transient and so on and so on and so on, right? And so what I would say to the person is like, I waited, like I got off the treadmill after being on it for, 15-ish years. I didn't really start questioning it until the last 5. The first 10, I was just like sucking down the Kool-Aid. And I fundamentally believe that, yes, like I am the collection of my prior experiences, right? I couldn't have started RadReads if I hadn't been miserable on Wall Street, because I write about being miserable on Wall Street. Like, this is that simple. Right? So I think we're the collection of our experiences, but it doesn't give us a free pass to not check in with ourselves and see if the ship's moving in the right direction and see if the direction is still the direction you want to go in.
I don't think you actually answered my question, though, about making money.
Do you need to?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, first of all, what does making money mean, right?
Yeah.
If you're 21 years old and you get a $15,000 signing bonus, like that's a fuckload of money.
Right.
If you're a 45-year-old and you live in Manhattan Beach, where the starting home price is 1.8 million, like that 15. So a lot of money is not even, I would say, like, you got to be more clear, right? A lot of money so that you never have to worry about money again, so that you could buy anything you ever wanted again, so you could provide for your aging parents. Like, again, it's just like put in some specificity in there, throw in a why or two.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I mean, I think that you can, you have to experience a lot of things yourself, but thankfully there are a lot of teachers that have done it for you. Now, you shouldn't just accept what the teachers say willy-nilly, but, especially if you find the right teachers that have gone through it, right? And that's why, like, a lot of these Buddhism or Stoicism, it's like we could pick up Stoicism today, 2,000 years later or whatever, and you're like, oh shit, this is talking to me. That's when you realize it's not a money thing. It's a human condition thing. But again, if it takes you the money, or look around, right? One of the clues for me was when I was a 35-year-old on Wall Street, I looked at people who were 15 years older than me, and they had the big houses in Summit and 2 X5s and the summer house, and the kids went to the private school. And I just looked, I was like, I say this without judgment, I don't want that for me.
Right.
So it wasn't necessarily an assessment on wealth or not, but it was like the path dependency of it, right? With the fact that there's many, many, many markers. And I think you can also along the way ask these questions like, what's enough? Right? What's enough?
Yeah. It's fascinating because I know where you're coming from, and I'm coming from a different place entirely.
Yeah.
Of $0 in income currently. Of being in debt, of living with my parents, of like also understanding I want to I want to do this. I want to pursue what I feel is truth. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not at the point where I'm saying like, what's enough? Like, this is a crazy amount. I'm like, should I start a course? Is that real to me? And so it's different questions. And so, you know, I think that your questions are, and the way you're talking about money is definitely valid for a lot of people. It just is not hitting home with me because I'm in a completely different place than what you're talking about.
No, and thank you for reminding me of the empathy required for, you know, to understand someone else's, right? Was it Kill a Mockingbird? You won't understand someone else until you've walked a mile in their shoes, right? And it's been a long time since my income was zero, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, what I would say is a few things, right? Is like, go for it, you know, go for it, but understand why you want it. And if it for you is like 7 figures, if it for you is, you know, buying your first apartment, is it for you is paying that, you know, go for it, right? As long as and know why you want it.
Yeah.
And then just course correct along the way. Because it might turn out that taking your debt to zero might be the greatest thing. It might actually bring you enduring peace and happiness. Maybe. It might be like, nice, what's next? Or it might be a non-event. But only you will know that in that moment, right? And no one can tell you what that will be in that moment. And once you get there, you might be like, wow, like my life is significantly better because I did this. And so the next thing might be, you know, moving into your own apartment. And then when you get there, and you should absolutely go for that, right? One of my teachers says, have a plan, hold it lightly. So have a plan, hold it light. Don't get so obsessed with the outcome that it like kind of causes you to suffer in the moment. And then reassess. But the beautiful thing about you is that you have a secret weapon. You have a not so secret weapon. Is that because you're so used to conversing with yourself, you'll actually be self-regulating along the way. And you'll say to yourself when you pay off that debt, you're like, I thought that I was going to feel like, you know, LeBron James and his chalk routine at the beginning. Like, that's what I thought I was going to feel. And what did I feel like? I felt like having a beer. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But only you will know.
I think it's important to be able to look at oneself while going through this process we call life, because the highs and the lows are so often just what we think they'll be and what they actually are different. And I'm grateful for you for just having this openness and awareness and experience. And I know we're over on time here, so we'll wrap it up. But yeah, thank you for giving me space to just be here. And I'm grateful for you bringing that same energy and awareness. So thank you.
Hey, Daddy, the pleasure is mine. And I thank you for, you know, inviting me on and the open and the great questions. And I just want to say that I was actually with one of my spiritual teachers and I said, you know, there are so few people that I can have this conversation with. And by this, I mean many of the things you and I talked about today. And, you know, take it for what it's worth. But to me, that is just such a sign, you know, and I'm not saying this to blow smoke up your ass. It's such a sign of like wisdom and curiosity and self-awareness, things that are, obviously I've shared are very important to me, but to turn it around, I don't know our age difference, but it's considerable. And I think that's I just want everyone to sit with that, right? That we ended on this note of bank account X versus bank account Y, but at the same time, we're all grappling with the same questions. And you have wisdom beyond your years. And I learn from you every time we talk and as I follow you and your work. And so the thanks and the love and the gratitude are right back at you.
Yeah. And I think that a key point of that is just understanding that we're really just the same in a real sense. And we're 99.9% similar. And if we can all just treat each other like 99.9% similar, I think the world might be a little bit better place, and at least your interactions might be better, starting with that. So thank you, Khe, for the kind words and beautiful time. We should do this more often. And where should we send the people for more Khe in their life?
Yeah, thank you. I'm game to do this. We don't even have to hit record. We can do this. I bet they want us to hit record. But thank you. I think that the best place, we actually created a little page for your listeners, radreads.co/Miranda. And so there we have a free training that goes through a lot of these different concepts, 10K framework, things like that. So it's radreads.co/Miranda, and my Twitter, my only social account is Kemerid, which is too long to spell, but you'll find it in the show notes.
Yes, you will. Thank you so much. This was great. To many more.
Thanks, brother.